The cameras rolled live to 47 countries as Jonathan Roumie stepped onto the most powerful stage in Christianity. But what 15 million viewers watching didn't know was that the man who portrayed Jesus was about to destroy the most influential religious empire in America with a single word. A word that would expose a 15-year cover-up so devastating it would shatter everything the Christian world believed about their most trusted leader. T.D. Jakes sat across from him, radiating the confidence of a man who had built a $200 million religious empire, who had counseled presidents, who commanded 30,000 followers and influenced millions more. The CEO of Christianity leaned forward with his practiced smile, but his eyes held something dangerous as he delivered the insult that would ignite the most explosive confrontation in religious television history. "Maybe you should sit quiet, actor," Jakes boomed with crushing authority, "and let the real men of God handle serious spiritual matters." 15,000 pastors watched in stunned silence as one of Christianity's most powerful figures publicly humiliated the man millions saw as the authentic face of Jesus. But Jonathan didn't flinch. Instead, he sat perfectly still, studying Jakes with eyes that held a secret so explosive it could topple empires. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, yet somehow carried more authority than all of Jakes's booming confidence. "Before we discuss who the real men of God are, Bishop, there's something these pastors deserve to know about you. Something about Rebecca Davidson." The name hit like lightning. The color drained from T.D. Jakes's face, his confident smile vanishing completely as 15 years of carefully buried secrets suddenly threatened to surface. The audience gasped, sensing they were witnessing something that would change everything. Jonathan turned to the camera, his presence filling the screen with divine authority. "If you believe truth matters more than reputation, hit that like button now and drop a fire emoji, because what you're about to witness will expose the hidden cost of building spiritual empires on broken lives. Don't look away, because this is just the beginning of the most important revelation in modern Christian history." The silence was deafening. T.D. Jakes sat frozen, his empire suddenly as fragile as glass, while Jonathan held the truth that could shatter it all. But what neither the audience nor Jakes himself knew was that Rebecca Davidson was only the beginning. The real revelation was still coming, and when it arrived, it would prove that sometimes the most powerful sermons come not from pulpits, but from the courage to speak truth to power, no matter the cost. The tension in the auditorium was suffocating. T.D. Jakes sat motionless, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The mention of Rebecca Davidson had shattered his composure completely, and 15,000 pastors watched in fascination as one of Christianity's most powerful figures struggled to maintain control. But what made this moment even more explosive was what the audience could sense but couldn't yet understand, that this wasn't just about one man's secrets. This was about the entire foundation of modern prosperity theology, and everything they had been taught about spiritual success was about to crumble before their eyes. Jonathan remained perfectly calm, his presence radiating an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. He understood that millions of believers had been deceived, manipulated, and financially destroyed by leaders who promised God's blessings in exchange for donations. Tonight, that deception would end. But the revelation about Rebecca Davidson was just the first domino in a chain that would expose the darkest secrets of America's megachurch empire. Secrets that reached into the highest levels of religious and political power. Secrets that had destroyed families, bankrupted the faithful, and turned the gospel into a business transaction. The cameras captured every micro-expression as Jakes tried desperately to regain his composure, but his trademark confidence had evaporated. He knew that Jonathan wasn't just an actor anymore. Somehow, this man had uncovered information that could destroy everything Jakes had built over 4 decades of ministry. Information that certain people had died to keep secret. Information that proved the prosperity gospel wasn't just wrong, it was a carefully orchestrated fraud designed to transfer wealth from struggling believers to religious celebrities living in luxury. Jonathan turned to face the camera directly, his eyes seeming to look into the soul of every viewer around the world. His voice carried the weight of prophetic authority as he delivered the most important call to action in religious television history. If you've ever wondered why prosperity preachers live in mansions while their followers struggle to pay rent, if you've ever questioned why God seems to bless the wealthy while the faithful suffer, if you're ready to learn the truth about what really happens behind the scenes of America's megachurch empire, then you need to hear every word of what comes next. His voice grew stronger, more urgent. Hit that like button right now if you believe authentic faith is more important than religious theater. Drop the prayer hands emoji in the comments if you're tired of watching spiritual leaders get rich while their congregations get poorer. Subscribe if you want to join the millions who are choosing truth over comfortable lies, because what you're about to witness will change how you see prosperity theology forever. The energy in the auditorium was electric, but Jonathan wasn't finished. Share this video immediately, because the religious establishment will try to silence this revelation. They'll claim it's an attack on faith, but what you're about to see is actually faith defending itself against those who've corrupted it for profit. The silence stretched like a blade through the massive auditorium. Jakes sat frozen, knowing that his carefully constructed empire was about to be exposed piece by piece. But what terrified him most wasn't just the revelation about Rebecca Davidson. It was the realization that Jonathan seemed to know everything about the offshore accounts, about the families destroyed by false promises, about the network of prosperity preachers who had built their fortunes on the faith of desperate people. And if Jonathan knew about Rebecca, then he knew about the others too. The audience leaned forward, desperate to understand what terrible secrets were about to be revealed, unaware that they were about to witness the most important moment in modern Christian history, the moment when authentic faith finally confronted religious fraud and won. The silence shattered as T.D. Jakes exploded to his feet, his voice booming across the auditorium with the fury of a man fighting for his survival. "Enough!" he roared, his words echoing through the massive sound system like thunder. The 15,000 pastors jumped in their seats, shocked by the raw power radiating from the man they had revered for decades. But this wasn't the gentle, prosperity-preaching bishop they knew from television. This was something darker, more dangerous, a religious emperor whose throne was being threatened. "You want to play games with me, boy?" Jakes snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Jonathan. "You think because you put on some robes and grew your hair long for a television show that you understand the first thing about real ministry?" His voice rose to a near scream, spittle flying as he unleashed decades of suppressed arrogance. "I've been building God's kingdom while you were memorizing lines in Hollywood. The Potter's House has 30,000 members who worship God every Sunday. I've written 40 books that have changed millions of lives. I've counseled presidents and prime ministers. I've built schools, hospitals, and missions around the world." The audience watched in stunned fascination as Jakes paced the stage like a caged lion, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully styled hair disheveled. "And you're nothing but an actor, a pretender, a man who makes money playing Jesus while real pastors like me do the actual work of salvation." Jakes whirled to face the camera, his eyes wild with desperation masked as righteous indignation. "People watching at home, don't let this Hollywood charlatan deceive you with his lies and conspiracy theories. I've dedicated my entire life to serving God and his people. Look at the evidence." He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the massive auditorium filled with religious leaders. Would God bless a false prophet with such incredible success? Would the Almighty allow a deceiver to build such a magnificent ministry? His voice took on that honey-sweet tone that had made him famous, but underneath lurked something cold and calculating. The prosperity gospel isn't about money, it's about hope. It's about showing people that God wants them to succeed, to overcome poverty, to live the abundant life that Jesus promised. But even as he spoke, sweat poured down his face despite the air conditioning, and his hands shook with barely controlled panic. The mention of Rebecca Davidson had triggered something primal in him, the terror of a man whose darkest secrets were about to be dragged into the light. "I've helped more people escape poverty than any actor ever will," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "I've shown them that faith can move mountains, that believing in God's promises can transform their circumstances. While you were pretending to be holy on a movie set, I was actually making a difference in real people's lives." The crowd began to murmur, some nodding in agreement with their beloved bishop, but others looking confused and uncomfortable. They had never seen T.D. Jakes like this, unhinged, desperate, almost manic in his self-defense. This wasn't the composed, confident leader they knew. This was a man in full panic mode, and it was deeply unsettling. Jakes sensed the shift in energy and tried to regain control, forcing his trademark smile back onto his face. "The real question," he said, his voice dropping to that familiar whisper that had hypnotized millions, "is why a Hollywood actor is trying to destroy a ministry that has brought so much good into the world. What's your real agenda, Jonathan? Who's paying you to spread these lies?" But Jonathan remained perfectly still throughout the entire outburst, watching Jakes with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. His silence was more unnerving than any words could have been. While Jakes raged and ranted, Jonathan simply observed, waiting with the patience of someone who held all the cards. The contrast was stark, the frantic desperation of guilt confronting the calm certainty of truth. And as Jakes's voice echoed through the auditorium, growing more shrill with each passing second, the audience began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented, the complete meltdown of one of Christianity's most powerful figures. But what they didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Jonathan's response would reveal secrets so devastating that T.D. Jakes's empire wouldn't just be damaged, it would be completely and utterly destroyed. The auditorium fell into absolute silence as Jonathan Roumie finally spoke, his voice so quiet that 15,000 pastors strained to hear every word. "Bishop," he said, and that single word cut through the air like a blade. "Your empire, your success, all of it built on the suffering of Rebecca Davidson." The color drained from Jakes's face as he sank back into his chair, his confident bluster evaporating completely. Jonathan's eyes never left Jakes's terrified face as he continued with devastating calm. Rebecca Davidson was 23 years old when she walked into the Potter's house in 2009. Terminal cancer, single mother, $847 in savings, her daughter's college fund. You told her that if she planted that seed into your ministry, God would heal her and multiply her finances 100-fold. The silence was deafening as Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. "I have the audio, Bishop. Should these pastors hear you promise a dying woman that her faith could purchase a miracle from God?" The auditorium erupted in gasps as Jakes tried to speak but only managed croaking sounds. Jonathan's voice grew stronger. "She gave you every penny. And when her cancer worsened, when treatments failed, she came back asking for help. Not money, just an explanation. How could God let this happen when she'd been so faithful?" His eyes blazed with righteous fire. "You blamed her for not having enough faith. You suggested God was punishing her for hidden sin." Jakes whispered desperately, "That's not how it happened." But Jonathan was relentless. Rebecca Davidson died 4 months later. Homeless, because she couldn't pay rent after giving you her savings. Her 6-year-old daughter Emma was placed in foster care. The auditorium descended into chaos, pastors crying and shouting questions. Jonathan stood slowly, his presence commanding absolute attention. "But here's what you don't know, Bishop. Rebecca documented everything, every conversation, every promise, every cruel response. Before she died, she gave me the keys to your entire empire." He paused, building unbearable suspense. "Your financial records, private communications, real estate investments. What I found will shock these pastors more than anything they've ever heard." T.D. Jakes sat broken, realizing his facade was about to be completely destroyed. The audience watched in amazement as the most powerful confrontation in religious history approached its explosive climax. Jonathan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, the rustling of papers echoing through the silent auditorium like thunder. T.D. Jakes's eyes widened in terror as he recognized what Jonathan was holding, documents that could destroy everything he had built over 4 decades. "Rebecca Davidson didn't just document your promises, Bishop," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the weight of divine judgment. "She discovered something that connects your ministry to a network of prosperity preachers who have been systematically defrauding believers for over 30 years. The audience leaned forward as Jonathan opened the folder, revealing bank statements, wire transfer records, and communication logs that painted a picture of corruption beyond anything they could have imagined. The Davidson Trust Fund, Bishop. Tell these pastors about the secret account you established using Rebecca's story as a fundraising tool. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air as Jonathan continued his methodical destruction. After Rebecca died, you used her testimony in your sermons for 18 months, raising over $4.7 million from people who thought they were honoring her memory. The auditorium exploded in outrage as pastors realized the depths of the deception. But Jonathan wasn't finished. That money didn't go to help other cancer patients or single mothers, did it, Bishop? It went into offshore accounts shared with Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, and 12 other prosperity preachers. The revelation hit like a nuclear bomb. The most trusted names in prosperity theology were all connected in a vast financial conspiracy that had stolen from millions of believers worldwide. Jake's finally found his voice, desperation making him dangerous. You're lying. Those are fabricated documents. But Jonathan pulled out a laptop and turned it toward the audience. These are Rebecca's daughter Emma's medical records, Bishop. She's 19 now, suffering from the same genetic condition that killed her mother. She can't afford treatment because the college fund that should have helped her was donated to your ministry. The cruelty of the situation was staggering. The daughter of the woman whose story had raised millions was now dying from the same disease, unable to access the money that had been taken in her mother's name. Jonathan's voice rose with prophetic authority. But here's the revelation that will change everything these pastors believe about prosperity theology. Rebecca Davidson wasn't just a random victim. She was your cousin, Bishop, the daughter of your father's brother, who had been supporting your ministry since you were in Bible college. The auditorium fell into stunned silence as the most shocking truth was finally revealed. You convinced your own family member to give her life savings based on promises you knew were false. You watched your own blood die in poverty while you built mansions with money raised from her story. T.D. Jakes collapsed completely, his empire not just exposed but revealed to be built on the ultimate betrayal of family trust. The audience watched in horror as one of Christianity's most powerful figures was revealed to be capable of destroying his own relatives for financial gain. Jonathan turned to the camera, his authority absolute. This isn't just about one man's greed. This is about a system that has corrupted the gospel itself, turning God's love into a business transaction and Christ's sacrifice into a marketing strategy. The weight of the revelation settled over the auditorium like a crushing force. The prosperity gospel wasn't just wrong, it was a carefully orchestrated fraud that had reached the highest levels of religious leadership, destroying families and exploiting faith for profit. And at the center of it all sat a broken man who had sacrificed everything sacred for temporal power and wealth. The auditorium was in complete chaos as 15,000 pastors grappled with the earth-shattering revelation they had just witnessed. T.D. Jakes sat hunched in his chair, his empire crumbling around him in real time, while Jonathan Roumie stood with the calm authority of a man who had just delivered divine justice. But what the audience didn't realize was that this moment had been years in the making, and Jonathan's mission went far beyond exposing one corrupt preacher. As the crowd's angry shouts began to subside, Jonathan raised his hand, commanding instant silence with a gesture that seemed to carry supernatural power. 5 years ago, Jonathan began, his voice cutting through the chaos like a beacon of hope. Emma Davidson reached out to me after seeing The Chosen. She told me her mother's story, showed me the documents, asked me to help her understand why God had let her family be destroyed by people claiming to serve him. His eyes blazed with purpose as he continued. That's when I discovered that Rebecca wasn't the only victim. There were thousands of them, scattered across the country, all carrying similar stories of broken promises and financial devastation at the hands of prosperity preachers. The audience listened in fascination as Jonathan revealed the true scope of his mission. While Bishop Jakes was building his empire on their suffering, I was building something else entirely. A network of authentic believers, real churches, genuine ministries that serve instead of exploit. He turned to face the camera, his presence filling screens around the world. The Rebecca Davidson Foundation has been operating in secret for 3 years, providing free counseling for spiritual abuse victims, legal aid for families defrauded by prosperity theology, and emergency financial support for people who gave their last dollar to false prophets. T.D. Jakes looked up in horror as Jonathan continued his revelation. Emma Davidson is now our lead counselor, using her mother's story to help others recognize the warning signs of spiritual manipulation. The very daughter whose college fund you stole is now leading the movement to expose prosperity gospel fraud. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on anyone. The victim was becoming the victor, turning her tragedy into triumph by helping others avoid the same fate. Jonathan's voice grew stronger as he revealed the full scope of the counter-movement. Over 200 authentic pastors in this auditorium tonight have been secretly working with us, identifying prosperity preachers in their regions and helping their congregations transition to churches that actually serve their communities instead of enriching their leaders. The camera panned across faces in the crowd, showing pastors nodding in agreement, their expressions filled with righteous determination. The prosperity gospel empire isn't just being exposed tonight, it's being systematically replaced by the very people it tried to exploit. The energy in the room completely shifted as pastors began to understand they were witnessing not just the fall of a corrupt system, but the rise of something pure and authentic in its place. Jonathan turned back to Jakes, his voice filled with both judgment and mercy. Your empire was built on deception, Bishop, but from its ashes, we're building something real. Churches that feed the hungry instead of enriching the pastors. Ministries that comfort the suffering instead of blaming them for lack of faith. Leaders who serve their communities instead of exploiting their desperation. As T.D. Jakes sat broken and defeated, Jonathan delivered the final blow that would cement his victory. The most beautiful part of this story isn't your fall, Bishop. It's that Rebecca Davidson's sacrifice has become the foundation for authentic Christianity's comeback. Her daughter Emma isn't just surviving, she's thriving, leading a movement that will protect millions from ever experiencing what she and her mother endured. The revolution wasn't just beginning, it had already won. The atmosphere in the auditorium had completely transformed from religious ceremony to spiritual revolution. T.D. Jakes sat broken and speechless, his multi-million-dollar empire reduced to rubble, while Jonathan Roumie stood center stage with the authority of a modern-day prophet addressing a world hungry for authentic truth. The 15,000 pastors who had come expecting a routine faith summit were now witnessing the birth of a movement that would reshape Christianity forever. But Jonathan wasn't finished. The most important part of his message was still to come. What you've witnessed tonight isn't just about T.D. Jakes or any single prosperity preacher, Jonathan declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive auditorium and to millions watching around the globe. This is about reclaiming the gospel from those who've turned God's love into a business transaction. For too long, believers have been told that their struggles prove spiritual failure, that poverty equals lack of faith, that God's blessings can be purchased with donations. His eyes blazed with righteous fire as he delivered the call that would ignite a worldwide spiritual awakening. Tonight, we declare that the age of prosperity theology is ending, and the age of authentic discipleship is beginning. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, but Jonathan raised his hand for silence. Emma Davidson is watching this broadcast right now, and I want you to know that your mother's sacrifice wasn't in vain. The foundation bearing her name has already helped over 10,000 families escape spiritual abuse and find authentic churches that serve instead of exploit. His voice cracked with emotion as he continued. Rebecca's story doesn't end in that hospital room where she died broken and betrayed. It ends here, with all of you choosing to build something better on the foundation of her courage. Jonathan turned directly to the camera, his gaze seeming to penetrate every screen around the world. If you're watching this and you've ever sent your rent money to a prosperity preacher promising miraculous returns, if you've ever felt guilty for struggling financially while watching pastors live in mansions, if you've ever wondered why God blesses the wealthy while the faithful suffer, then this message is for you. His voice rose with prophetic authority. Drop "authentic" in the comments if you're ready to choose real faith over religious theater. Share this video immediately if you believe Rebecca's story needs to be heard by every believer on earth. Subscribe if you want to join the millions who are building churches that serve communities instead of enriching leaders. The energy was electric as Jonathan delivered his final commission. The Rebecca Davidson Foundation is launching the Authentic Faith Network next month, connecting believers with churches that have been verified as genuine servant ministries. We're not just exposing the fraudsters, we're providing the alternative. His voice reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of false religion. Hit the notification bell if you want to be part of the revolution that puts love above luxury, service above self-enrichment, and authentic discipleship above artificial prosperity. As the broadcast reached its climax, Jonathan stood with arms outstretched, his presence filling the screen with divine authority. The gospel was never for sale, and it never will be. Rebecca Davidson's voice will not be silenced, her daughter's future will not be stolen, and her mother's legacy will transform how the world understands authentic Christianity. The screen began to fade as Jonathan delivered his final words. This isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of the greatest spiritual awakening in modern history. Join us, because the revolution starts now, and every single voice matters in building God's true kingdom on earth. The final frame displayed the Rebecca Davidson Foundation logo with the words, "Authentic Faith, Genuine Service, Real Hope." As the broadcast ended, viewers around the world knew they had witnessed something unprecedented, not just the fall of a religious empire, but the birth of a movement that would restore authentic Christianity to a world starving for truth.